All right, welcome back to another episode of the Formula One Power Rankings. This is after the Portuguese and the Emilia Romagna, I think that's what it was, the Grand Prix. I just said Imola because that's the name of the track they went to. So we're coming up on the end of the season. We are 4 races away from the end of the season. We got the Turkish Grand Prix coming up this weekend, and then also after that, there's the 2 races at Bahrain. One of them on the regular Bahrain circuit, and then the other on the oval circuit, the near oval circuit, and then finally ending at the Yas Marina circuit in Abu Dhabi. So let's get right into this and see where we go. So number 20, we got Nicholas Latifi. This has been a commonplace for the Williams drivers. Williams has yet to score a point yet this season. They've come close on a couple occasions. Latifi's had a couple 11th place finishes, and I know George Russell had a good run at it at Imola. He was getting up there. He was actually in the top 10 for a little bit, but then he ended up falling out because of having to retire. So who knows? Will Williams score a point in 2020? This would be probably unprecedented for Williams as a team to not score a point 2 years in a row. I'm not sure how often that they didn't score points in the past, but obviously, like I don't know, looking back to their starting out seasons back in like the late 70s, but certainly in a long, long time, Williams has not gone this. I mean, even and that's the other thing is that even if if they get no points again this year, so yeah, that'll be 2 consecutive seasons without any points. But really, it's almost 3 consecutive seasons without any points because they only got one in 2019. So, um, so no, it would only. What am I saying here? This would actually be their first season with no points. I don't know what I'm talking about here. This would be their first season with no points because last year they did get one. I'm thinking like trying to think too far back in time because they did get quite a few in 2018, but obviously unprecedented bad times for Williams. Number 19, we've got Kevin Magnussen, obviously going to be out of a job next year. Haas is. I'm interested to see where they go because I know they're kind of their big plan is that they're going to, they're planning to really. Because I know Gene Haas is getting a bit impatient with the results that the team is getting. I'll go ahead and skip forward here. Number 18 is George Russell. Obviously, I already talked about him, how he almost got was in the points at Imola for a little bit until he had to retire. Solid weekends for George Russell, but nothing too spectacular. And then number 17, Romain Grosjean. So back to Haas. I know Gene Haas has been talking about that they want to at least stick around until the regulation changes come in 2022 to see if they can make a more competitive car. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future if they're not competitive because they obviously are it's the team with the lowest budget in Formula One. It's the newest team in Formula One. It's only been around since 2016, so it doesn't have the long history that some of these other teams have, like Williams, for example. Even though Williams is struggling right now, this is a team that's been around in Formula One since the late 70s. So, and it's a very historic team. It's not one of the. It's not like it's a team that's been around for a long time and hasn't won anything. No, it's a team that's been around for a long time, and it's the fourth most successful team in Formula One behind Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari. So it's interesting to see what happens with Haas because obviously this isn't Gene Haas's main investment. He owns a NASCAR team. He has a couple other investments that he has in auto racing. So I'm interested to see what happens if they do end up staying and what the decision's going to be if Gene Haas decides he's going to sell the team or what's going to happen if they don't have the success that they thought. Because it seems like I know Gunther Steiner said that Gene Haas definitely is interested in Formula One. It just when there's not a lot of success happening and when you're a very low funded team, then your incentive for sticking around really isn't that great, especially with teams like with Mercedes, consistently dominating the front of the grid. There doesn't seem like there's much room right now for a team like Haas to grow and possibly get up there to be a competitive level. There is room for them to possibly get to the top of the midfield or at least like the middle of the midfield, but there's no avenue right now for them to become a top three team the way with like kind of the monopoly that Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari have on that. Obviously, Ferrari not this season, but Ferrari has the money to make a better team. So um, Yeah, Roman Grosjean. So at number 16 and number 15, we've got the two Alfa Romeo guys, Antonio Giovinazzi and Kimi Raikkonen. Now, it was recently announced that both Kimi Raikkonen and Antonio Giovinazzi would be coming back to Alfa Romeo next season. Bit of a shock, I think, to a lot of people that mainly Antonio Giovinazzi is going to be coming back. I know it was pretty much like if Kimi Raikkonen for him was pretty much just if he wanted to come back or not. That if he wanted to, then he would be allowed back. But if he didn't want to, then he could retire. So that's not so much of a surprise as the fact that they are allowing Antonio Giovinazzi to come back. He has kind of stepped up his game a little bit here later in the season, probably realizing that his seat was going to be his seat was under threat because with all the talk about Mick Schumacher and some of these other young drivers, which also kind of brings me now back to Haas. Now that Alfa Romeo has confirmed that Giovinazzi and Raikkonen will be racing for the team next season, now there's a lot of question behind who Haas is going to bring in. Now, still have no doubt that Mick Schumacher is probably going to get one of the seats. I thought he was going to get the seat at Alfa Romeo, but now with Giovinazzi in it, I think Mick Schumacher for sure is going to get one of the seats at Haas. Now, the question for Haas becomes whether they want to pair Mick Schumacher with another young up-and-coming talent, or they want to go after a veteran like Sergio Perez or Nico Hulkenberg. If it was my personal opinion, I'd go after a veteran. I think it's better to have one experienced and one young driver. I think having two young drivers sometimes can be a bit, um, not going to go as well as it would be having a veteran. I mean, I know there's kind of like a youth movement going on right now in Formula One. I mean, there's two young drivers at McLaren with Carlos Sainz um, and Lando Norris, and then obviously there's two young drivers at Red Bull with Max Verstappen and Alexander Albon. Although I would kind of consider Max Verstappen kind of on a different level than most of these other young drivers, but it's definitely an interesting scenario for Haas, like which direction they want to go, because obviously Haas has kind of been like, along with that remaining seat at AlphaTauri, with the news that this seat at Alfa Romeo is going to be filled by Giovinazzi, and now Mick Schumacher is likely going to take one of the seats at Haas. The windows for guys like Sergio Perez and the options for him and the options for guys like Sergio Perez and Nico Hulkenberg are closing right now. They're really getting small, so it's definitely going to be, and maybe someone else like Kevin Magnussen. I mean, I've mentioned before that I don't think Magnussen's going to be back because his only other option at this point would be that seat at AlphaTauri if they want to give it to him. Because obviously Haas isn't going to cut him and then bring him back. Be like, oh yeah, no, sorry, JK, we want you back. So definitely the windows are closing for Perez and Hulkenberg, and especially if Haas decides to go with two young drivers, this is going to be a very young and a slightly new grid coming on next season. So number 14, we've had Lance Stroll. Definitely a pair of really bad weekends for Lance Stroll. Kind of a bad 3 weekends in a row, really. Obviously, he had to sit out the Eiffel Grand Prix because he had COVID-19, and then a 20th place retirement at Portugal, and then a 14th at Imola. Not good weekends for Lance Stroll. I mean, it's one of those things that again like makes you maybe somewhat question what Racing Point was thinking when they decided to drop Sergio Perez and keep Lance Stroll. Now, it has not Lance Stroll is not officially confirmed for Racing Point or for Aston Martin next season. That is something I do want to point out, even though there's all the talk and all the expectation that Lance Stroll is going to be coming back next season for Aston Martin. He is not actually confirmed, so it seems kind of odd that Lawrence Stroll would not be working on getting his son a contract and getting that signed and ready. But you could also kind of look at the flip side of that. It's like, well, who cares? Like, they're just going to end up doing it anyway because, daddy's not going to let his boy leave the team. So definitely disappointing results for Lance Stroll, especially when his teammate is getting a lot more out of this car and has been all season. Um, I'm not sure what the future is going to look like for Lance Stroll going forward. Obviously, he was showing lots of promise in the middle of the season, and I was kind of starting to reverse my opinion on him, but now my opinion's kind of going back to where it was when we started this season because, I mean, if you look at it, obviously sometimes results like retirements can't be helped, but like 12th and 15th in qualifying for a car that's supposed to be probably the fourth best on the grid is not good. I mean, third best at, if you can get the most out of it, it could be the third best on the grid. So it's not good when you're qualifying outside the top 10 on a consistent basis. So, I mean, I could kind of chalk maybe the Portuguese Grand Prix up to like maybe that was a little bit of rust because obviously he was out of the car for so long, but no excuse at Imola with the 15th place qualifying and the 14th place finish. Number 13, Sebastian Vettel, obviously the driver who has been confirmed for Aston Martin. I don't think there's much else to say about Sebastian Vettel. Just he's kind of hanging around where he's been all season, kind of that 10th to 14th range, really. Occasionally dipping into the top 10 and getting a point, but just it's crazy to see. I mean, I'm going to keep saying it. It's just crazy to see how much he's fallen off. He's already posted a couple good times in practice for the upcoming Turkish Grand Prix, so obviously he's one of the. I think it's him, Lewis Hamilton, and Kimi Raikkonen are probably the only drivers on the grid who have ever actually run at that circuit in the past. It was pretty funny how at Imola, Kimi Raikkonen was the only one who had raced on that circuit before, but you could add Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel to the list of drivers who have raced at Turkey. So who knows? Maybe this will help him get back to it, especially with the times he's been posting. Who knows? But then, it seems like Vettel will always put up fast times in practice, but then come qualifying, he just forgets how to drive. So I don't know. We'll see. At number 12, we've got Danny Kvyat. An exceptionally good run for Kvyat at Imola. Fourth place finish. That's his highest finish all season, and obviously right on the cusp of a podium. I have a unfortunate feeling that Danny Kvyat is not going to be brought back to AlphaTauri. I think that's been pretty much what's the rumor and whatnot that's been going around that Kvyat for sure is not going to be coming back, and it's too bad because I think he does deserve a seat somewhere in Formula One. But unfortunately for him, if it's not going to be at AlphaTauri, then it's probably going to be nowhere because with Haas going to be bringing in. Haas is going to be bringing in at least one young driver, possibly two, and if not two young drivers, then they're going to get somebody like Sergio Perez or Nico Hulkenberg. And obviously, the only other open seats right now technically Aston Martin's open, but that's probably going to go to Lance Stroll, and obviously technically Mercedes and Red Bull are open. Red Bull's they're going to take one of their drivers from there. They're going to take a different young driver, or they're going to bring Alexander Albon back. They're not going to elevate Kvyat to the main team again. And then obviously Mercedes is still technically open, but they'd probably rather bring in someone else than Danny Kvyat. So unfortunate, but obviously a good weekend for Kvyat. I mean, he's kind of been in the same championship position all year long. Obviously disappointing at Portugal, but I mean, he's always a consistent driver. He's a good driver, and it's going to be unfortunate to see him leave the sport most likely next season. So at number 11, we've got Esteban Ocon, obviously Fernando Alonso's teammate next season. Still kind of not putting out the results that you'd hope. We're kind of seeing this a lot right now when it comes to certain teams where you've got one driver that's kind of performing at the peak of their performance, and the other one is kind of meddled at mediocrity. I mean, we've been seeing this with Ferrari all season with Vettel and Leclerc, with Leclerc consistently doing a lot better than Sebastian Vettel. And I mean, Esteban Ocon's kind of keeping that up with Ricciardo, where Ricciardo's still outperforming him. He did finish ahead of Ricciardo at the Portuguese Grand Prix, but obviously a completely terrible performance at Imola compared to his teammate, a retirement, but even so, qualifying in 12th when his teammate was qualifying up in the top 6. So still very interested to see what happens next season between him and Fernando Alonso. Number 10, the guy who just must be falling to rock bottom right now, Alexander Albon. It's going to be interesting to see the decision that Red Bull makes. I mean, I know they've been saying all season that Albon is their first choice, and they still want to stick with Alexander Albon, but it's just like, I don't know how you can consistently. I mean, like I said, we've been seeing this with Ferrari, and we've been seeing this with Renault, but even more so with Red Bull, like with Alexander Albon. I mean, Max Verstappen is going out and getting on the podium almost every week, and Alexander Albon is over here struggling to get in the points. It's looking like the past few weeks, and you know, it's one thing to have a car that finishes in the points pretty consistently, and the other driver's not finishing in the points. But when one driver is finishing on the podium consistently, and the other driver is not even in the points, that's a really bad look for that driver. I know there's obviously all the talk about being Max Verstappen's teammate is, it's difficult because obviously Red Bull's going to give all their preferential treatment to Max Verstappen. He's the superstar, he's the future champion, blah, 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 blah. And Alexander Albon's just kind of here to be his support man. So, um, I mean, Alexander Albon probably feels a bit like Mark Webber right now, how he felt when Sebastian Vettel was at Red Bull. Obviously the first season, Vettel and Webber were kind of even, but then after Vettel won his first championship, it was all Sebastian Vettel. Like, Vettel gets the treatment, Mark Webber, you're a number two driver. So hopefully he can turn it around. I mean, because honestly, if Red Bull does not give him the seat, then I'd be surprised if he stayed in Formula One. I don't think they're going to demote him back to AlphaTauri. I think if they're not going to have Alexander Albon at Red Bull, then they're probably going to move on from him altogether and bring in two new drivers. But they keep saying that he's their first choice, so we'll see what happens next season. Number 9, we've got Lando Norris. I don't know what's been crazy. What's been happening to Lando Norris when he was, at the start of the season, he had a rocket fast start to the season where he was finishing consistently in the top 5, and he even had his first podium at Austria. But it's just been a downward spiral. I don't know if I want to call it a downward spiral, but it's just been like he's kind of been dabbling in mediocrity ever since then. I mean, kind of finishing in that range between like 7th and 13th, and not really ever challenging for a podium place anymore. So I know McLaren obviously had high hopes for him after the first few races, but who knows? We'll see. I don't know if that's a product of the car or if it's a product of the driver. But definitely Lando Norris is on a downward trend and has been since the start of the season. Number 8, we have Pierre Gasly. Consistently showing that he can get more out of the AlphaTauri car than is, predicted. Obviously, AlphaTauri, their car was very fast at Imola, so his 4th place qualifying wasn't too unexpected because Kvyat did end up finishing the race in 4th place, but a 9th place qualifying effort at Portugal, which was well ahead of his teammate. He's kind of got like the Charles Leclerc syndrome where like he's getting more out of a car than he should. And obviously, good things for Pierre Gasly, probably going to come for him in the future. Number 7, finally starting to get a string of good results, Carlos Sainz. He's finally gone quite a few weeks in a row without having a retirement, so he's starting to work his way back up in the standings. He's up to 8th place in the standings, where he was kind of marred around 10th and 11th for most of the season, but he's up to 8th place in the standings and a 6th and a 7th place finish, so good results for Carlos Sainz. I knew this would probably be where he would be at if he could just avoid the mechanical failures and all that stuff. So definitely signs for Carlos Sainz that are promising. We'll see how he does next season with Ferrari. We'll see if he kind of has like a Charles Leclerc type season or if he has a Sebastian Vettel type season where he can't get out of the car what he's supposed to. We'll see. It's just a work in progress, and it's going to make next season very interesting with lots of drivers on new teams. Number 6, Sergio Perez. I mentioned before that he was consistently getting better results than Lance Stroll. A 7th and a 6th, kind of the inverse of Carlos Sainz. Still without a seat next season. There's still an opening at AlphaTauri. There's still the possibility of Haas. But like I mentioned earlier, the window is closing for Sergio Perez. And do I think he'll have a seat next season? I do. I think like out of all the drivers on the grid right now that aren't confirmed for a seat, I think Sergio Perez is the most likely to actually get a seat. Alexander Albon's probably second on that list, but Sergio Perez is definitely first on the list. I mean, I think any team would be happy to have him. He's a veteran. He's a fast driver. Consistently gets good results, and you can't go wrong with someone like that. Number 5, Daniel Ricciardo. Another podium for Daniel Ricciardo. So More applause for Daniel Ricciardo. 2 podiums so far this year. He had one at the Nürburgring and one at Imola, and who knows, maybe a third one could be on the way in one of these future weeks. It's just continuing to impress. Nothing much else to say about Daniel Ricciardo. He still is one of the best drivers on the grid, and interesting to see how he does with McLaren next season. Number 4, Charles Leclerc. Um, Leclerc, this is actually where he started the season. He started the season at number 3 when I did these rankings before the season started. And he kind of had this thing where he would kind of dip between 4th and ninth. Like he would fall really low, but then he would like jump up again because he'd get like a podium or something, and then, but then he'd fall back down. And he was kind of near the bottom of my list for a while, but he's recently jumped back up a 4th and a 5th at the 2 most recent Grand Prix, and he's looking fast already at Turkey. He posted the fastest time in FP2, so sorry, he was the second fastest in FP2. Max Verstappen was the fastest. So he's looking fast again, and just getting consistently showing that he's one of the most talented drivers on the grid, taking a Ferrari car that probably shouldn't even be finishing in the top 8 or top, maybe sometimes finishing in the top 10, and he's consistently challenging for podiums and finishing in the top 5 and, even qualifying up there. So good work for Charles Leclerc, and like I said, I have no doubt that he's going to be a champion one day. So number 3, the top 3 are unchanged once again. Max Verstappen at number 3, Valtteri Bottas at number 2, Lewis Hamilton at number 1. Max Verstappen, he's the 3rd best driver pretty much consistently. This is where he's been all season. Him and Bottas kind of usually fight it out for 2nd because Lewis is always at the front. Obviously, probably a good season for Max given the circumstances, but obviously I know he'd want to win more races. I mean, he is the only driver so far outside of Mercedes to win a race this season when he won the race at the second race at Silverstone, the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, but obviously it's... Oh, I actually said that wrong too. I said he's the only driver to win outside of Mercedes. That's not true. Pierre Gasly won at the Italian Grand Prix. But that was a very interesting race, to say the least. But yeah, so I'm sure he would hope to have more than one win at this stage in the season. He could still get another one. He's been the fastest in both of the first practice sessions at the Turkish Grand Prix, although I don't really put much weight in the first practice session, given that the surface was very slippery and it had like just been repaved and it was cold and the tires were cold, so pretty well everybody was slipping around. And I think his fastest time in that session was like 11 seconds off of the record time at the Turkish Grand Prix, which at some point should fall. So definitely not representative, but if anyone can drive a car on a challenging circuit, it's Max Verstappen. And then obviously Valtteri Bottas at number 2, the consistent runner-up. It's his window is very small now. I mean, it was getting smaller, and now it's very small. Basically, I don't know how much Hamilton would have to outscore him by at the Turkish Grand Prix, but definitely Lewis Hamilton is in position to clinch the World Championship at the Turkish Grand Prix. He currently has... I mean, even if he doesn't, his lead is pretty insurmountable. I mean, he's got math. He's got something like a 97, 80. He's got like an 87-point lead or something like that on Valtteri Bottas. Here, let me put this in my calculator. Yeah, he's got an 85-point lead on Valtteri Bottas right now. So, if you look at the max amount of points you can get per weekend is 26. So, basically, yeah, he would need to outscore him by quite a bit this weekend if he wanted to clinch the championship. So the most likely scenario is that he clinches it at Bahrain the next time around. Because if Lewis finishes first and Valtteri second, like normal, then he won't clinch it here. But if he ends up clinching it at Bahrain, don't be surprised. And it's basically Valtteri Bottas would need a miracle at this point, and just like I said at the start of the season, don't bet against Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, Mercedes, I don't think anyone saw them being this dominant. I'm sure people saw them as being dominant because, I mean, they have been for the past, I mean, really since 2014. But I don't think anyone saw them being as dominant as they have been. Where I mean, they've won all but 2 races, and I mean, one of those, the Italian Grand Prix, was just like a weird race, and then the 70th anniversary, even though they didn't win that, they still, ended up finishing second and third. So I mean, this car is kind of reminiscent of the F 2004 in a way. Like, the kind of in the F 2004 was, it finished on the podium at every race in the season, which obviously that hasn't happened because they didn't end up on the podium at the Italian Grand Prix, but it's rivaling the F 2004 when it comes to dominance. I still think the F 2004 is a faster car, but its dominance cannot be overshadowed as to how ridiculously good Mercedes has been this year. I mean, they clinched the constructors championship already. I mean, and the crazy thing is too is that Lewis Hamilton alone would have enough points to clinch the constructor. Like, if he continued on the truck that he would be on, Lewis Hamilton would not only win the drivers' championship, but he would win the constructors' championship all on his own. Like, if Valtteri Bottas had not gotten any points throughout the entire season, Mercedes would still win the constructors' championship. So ridiculous how good they are. I do think it's still interesting that at this point in the season, Lewis Hamilton still has not signed a contract for next season. I keep hearing all these rumors that he's going to retire, which I don't see that happening. I don't see why he would. I mean, he's still at the top of his game, and you know, I mean, if I had an opportunity to go for a record-breaking 8th championship, I wouldn't retire just yet. I mean, you know, you look at Jimmy Johnson in NASCAR, like, he gave it like 3 seasons of trying to go for that 8th championship, and then obviously, he kind of his talent level wasn't there, and he just wasn't getting the results, so he decided to retire. Which, like, at that point, I think that is the right time to retire. But when you're still at the top of your game and still definitely in the hunt to be challenging for another championship, I don't see why he would retire. That just seems a bit like these rumors don't have any real truth or real substance to them. But I do think it is still odd that he hasn't signed a contract yet because, I mean, he's not going to be anywhere except Mercedes next season. He's not going to go to another team. He's not going to, it's either he's going to retire or he's going to drive for Mercedes. So, but I mean, there also has been a lot of rumors that Toto Wolff is thinking about stepping down as the Mercedes team principal. So it's kind of an interesting story to see, like, this team that has been the most dominant team in Formula One over the past 6 years, or 7 years now. The most dominant team in Formula One over the past 7 years. I mean, they're surpassing Ferrari's run with Michael Schumacher in the early 2000s. When you looked back on the most dominant teams in Formula One, that was your first thought, like, oh, Ferrari from 2000 to 2004 with Michael Schumacher. But now, I mean, Mercedes with Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg in 2016 they've surpassed that, in my opinion. So it's crazy to think that there's this kind of inner turmoil or I don't know if it's turmoil, but just like indecision on the part of Mercedes. Like, will Lewis Hamilton come back? Will Toto Wolff come back? Obviously, Valtteri Bottas has already been confirmed and signed for next season, but it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Mercedes. And I mean, it could very well shape who's going to win the championship next season. So thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to have 2 more episodes of this. And the next one will be coming out after the first Bahrain Grand Prix. And then I will be back after that. We'll do an episode after the Bahrain Grand Prix, and then we'll close after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix with a season wrap-up and final rankings. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope to see you guys soon, and as Zach always says, be clutch.